Everybody with Angela Williamson is made possible by Fireheart Pictures and viewers like you. Thank you. Learning is defined as the process of acquiring and retaining information and experiences. Although the way we learn is constantly evolving, we still gather information using our 5 senses, as well as retain and process it based by our own unique preferences. Tonight, our 2 guests educate us by using our sense of taste and sight to help us learn something new. I'm so happy you're joining us.
From Los Angeles, this is KLCS PBS. Welcome to Everybody with Angela Williamson, an innovation, arts, education, and public affairs program. Everybody with Angela Williamson is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you. And now your host, Dr. Angela Williamson.
Our show starts tonight with Chris Merritt. Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You know, the first thing I thought when I read this book, and there's so many interesting facts in it, and I know we only have you for a short time tonight, so I want you to tell this one story.
Okay.
In a minute.
All right.
But first, I think that for me, this is probably the most in-depth history I've ever heard about Knott's Berry Farm. Am I correct or am I wrong?
Well, I'd like to think so, but thank you very much. It's a nice compliment. We, spent almost 2 decades researching this. I started in the 1980s actually tracking people down and interviewing them and not really knowing I wanted to do a book, but at a certain point I was like, wow, there's enough here for a book. So it was and is an attempt to give a full look at what Walter Knott created in Buena Park starting back in 1920 and still going strong today. It's pretty amazing.
And when I was reading this book, it just seemed that it was really personal. So why is this book personal to you? Because I could feel in your writing that it's personal when you're sharing. So
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit why you think it's personal.
Well, it's personal to me because like a lot of people who grew up in Orange County, I grew up at Knott's Berry Farm and Disneyland and other Southern California attractions, but I was very fortunate that I was able to go to Knott's a lot when I was a child. My father worked for a television studio and in Leisure World, if you ever heard of Leisure World.
Yes.
And as a nice byproduct of that, he got a lot of free tickets to Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm. So I kind of grew up there. I got to go a lot more than you probably would have. It's kind of home in a lot of ways. And my co-author, Eric, kind of feels the same way too. He kind of grew up. And then we have, our grandparents, went to Knott's in the 40s and 50s and ate chicken dinners there. And there's a photo of my father and my grandmother in the front of the book at Knott's in the early 1950s.
I wondered, who are these people there?
Yeah.
So these are actual some family photos in here. Wow.
Eric's got some photos from his grandparents in here too, so it's a very personal thing to us too. And just an attempt, we had felt that the history had not been really documented at that point. And so we were very fortunate to find a great publisher in Angel City Press, and we were able to get this out. And it's been really wonderful because we've had a lot of support from Knott's Berry Farm. They sell the book at the farm. The new 100-year anniversary edition is actually, you can only get that at Knott's Berry Farm. And it's just really a nice thing to have documented it and, like you say, preserved it, right? Which is a terrible pun, but
it's wonderful. That's probably why I told you I was hungry a lot while I was reading this book. But I find it really interesting because you really took, when we look at what you did, really as a historian. You went and you actually did all of these interviews with people who had worked there, and you said over 2 decades. Some of those people aren't even here with us today.
Most of them aren't, yeah.
Most of them are.
Yeah.
What was the biggest takeaway that you got when you were interviewing all these people who had experienced this from working there, where you experienced it as a child?
The biggest takeaway that was interesting to me, and I never really thought of it in this way, is that people who had been working there since the 1940s, when Walter Knott really built up the ghost town as we know it today, so many people were working there as either concessionaires or performers or working in the shops or working in the chicken dinner restaurant. They all kind of felt like a family, and it was almost like a small town. I find it kind of akin to Greenfield Village by Henry Ford. You know, it was like this little small community, and it's interesting because there was no great community plan behind Knott's Berry Farm. Russell Knott, Walter Knott's son, told me, he said, you know, it grew like Topsy, you know, and it did. There was no plan. It just, Walter Knott just kind of kept adding little buildings and little shops and little experiences. And then by the time you hit the 1950s, to help compete with Disneyland, they start adding rides with people like Bud Hurlbut, who we talk a lot about in the book. So it just kind of grew, not with a master plan, not like Disneyland. It just kind of tentacled out, and yeah.
And I want to come back to Bud in a minute,
Sure.
but you mentioned Walter's son. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting in the book is how this really was a family affair.
Absolutely.
And so can you tell us a little bit about that, and then maybe even add in some of your personal thoughts about it too, because that was really interesting.
Yeah, well, I think it's fascinating to think that the four children of Walter and Cordelia Knott really grew up at Knott's Berry Farm. In fact, when they acquired the property, they built this 80-foot long frontage along Grand Avenue, which is still there today in the chicken dinner restaurant, and they built their home right behind it. So literally they would wake up and they would come down and they would go out to the tea room that Cordelia operated, and they would serve on their wedding china. They would serve, it started out as snacks and pie and things like that, and eventually became the chicken dinners that they became so famous for. But they grew up there, and there's photos in the book of, you know, Russell Knott working alongside Walter in the berry farm, and you know, you could, in the 1940s, you could just pull up your car and park along Grand Avenue and walk right in, and Walter Knott would wait on you and his family would wait on you, and it's kind of amazing to think that they all grew up with it. You know, it's funny because a lot of people assume that all the buildings at Knott's Berry Farm are actual old buildings, and a few of them are, but most of them were actually designed by a gentleman named Paul von Kleben, who was an Austrian who was obsessed with Western culture, and came and designed a lot of these things for Mr. Knott, as they all called him. But the schoolhouse that you mentioned was actually acquired, it was in Iowa, and it was out in the, let's see, now I'm gonna have to check my notes. It's either Iowa or Kansas. I gotta check my book.
No, everybody, you need to buy the book so that you
Right.
find out if it's Iowa or Kansas. So that's our teaser. So go on with the story.
I think I confused Iowa because there's a sign on the front that says Iowa, but regardless, it was an old schoolhouse that dated back to the late 1800s. Walter Knott acquired it at auction, had it dismantled, and then brought to Knott's Berry Farm. And not only was it an attraction at the farm, but they actually did teach school for a time there. They had a retired school teacher, and the Knott grandchildren actually attended classes there for a time, which is fascinating to think about.
Well, and when I saw that, I'm like, let me reread this. I'm not reading this. Oh my goodness, they did go to school there, and that was so interesting.
I will say one thing that really stands out to me, and Eric and I are working on a new book right now that related to Knott's, related to the design of the Knott's Berry Tales ride in the 1970s. But you mentioned the children.
Yes.
Marion Knott, his youngest, she really, when Walter Knott kind of got too old to add more attractions in the late 60s, she kind of took over the design and the expansion of Knott's Berry Farm.
Wow.
And to my mind, she really is the first female executive creative designer to expand a theme park in the United States. She added an area that's called Fiesta Village that did rather well. She added an area after that called the Gypsy Camp, which did really terribly, and she replaced that in the mid-70s with an area called the Roaring Twenties. And as part of that expansion, there was a little charming dark ride called Knott's Berry Tales that was designed by Rolly Crump, who's a famous Imagineer who did a lot of work at Disneyland on the Haunted Mansion and the Enchanted Tiki Room. He had left Disney and was freelancing and designed probably the most charming little cute dark ride ever that was at Knott's Berry Farm because of Marion Knott. And it's kind of neat to see everything old is new again, because that ride went away in the 80s, and they just brought back a new version of it in the same exact location. So it's pretty cool.
Oh, that is so
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah. Well, you mentioned some things that they did that didn't work. And this would be before Marion's time, but I think it's really interesting that you're bringing up that she's the first person, the first woman to
Right.
do something like
Right.
that, because
Yeah.
when we have Women's History Month, there's so many trailblazers out there that people have never heard of.
Right.
So I'm glad that you and
Yeah.
Eric are doing this book.
Yeah, we really want to celebrate her as that, and Rolly for the designs that he did. So hopefully that'll be out sometime next year.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
You know, now that you've told me that,
Yeah.
I'll be reaching out to you
Oh,
when
okay,
that comes out.
Cool.
But you talked about things that didn't work, and one I thought was really interesting to me was when they had this idea for horses, and how that didn't work, but they changed it around to something that's really popular today. So I love for you to tell that story, because I
Sure.
can't tell that story, only you can.
Sure. So Walter Knott really started developing the ghost town in the early 1940s. And like I said, it kind of expanded like Topsy. So you started with this little kind of Main Street drag of buildings.
Yes.
And he just kind of kept adding, and it kind of kept
Okay.
spreading out and spreading out. He built this saloon in the 1950s, the Calico Saloon, with
Yeah.
the can-can dancers.
Yes.
And adjacent to the Calico Saloon, they did an attraction called the Mark Smith Horse Show. And Mark Smith was a semi-famous horse master, I guess you could say. He did stunts and things like that. He was sort of known and performed with circuses and things like that. Walter built this outdoor amphitheater for him with no shade, right? So tiered seating. And the idea was that even though you were at Knott's already, you would buy an extra ticket, so you would pay on top, and you would come in and you would see this Mark Smith horse show where they'd perform stunts and things like that. It performed terribly. People would see it once, if at all, and never come back again. And so they started calling it Walter's Folly, which is kind of sad.
Oh.
And and one of the old park employees, Guy Tester, said, those horses, whether people came or not, they kept eating and kept crapping. And so they had to do something about it. So now there's a gentleman who we talk a lot about in the book. His name is Wendell Bud Hurlbutt.
Yes, I said we were coming back to Bud.
And he was this amazing guy who operated Kittylands in the 1940s and 50s all around Los Angeles with other people. So little miniature train rides, small little rides for children in parks and things that people could go visit. He always wanted to ride at Knott's Berry Farm. And Walter Knott was like, no, I don't want rides here. This is a ghost town. I don't want any of that. Well, by 1955, Disneyland had opened. There was some competition happening, and people who were polled said, we would actually like to see some rides at Knott. So he let Bud bring one of his beautiful old late 1800s Denzel carousels and put it on the property. It's still there today. You can still ride all these beautiful hand-carved animals. They're amazing. It's worth a fortune. And he did little rides here and there, and by the time you got to the late 1950s, Walter Knott came to Bud and said, we got to get rid of this horse show. It's terrible. What could you come up with if you think of something here? And Bud goes, I've got some ideas. And he goes, well, don't forget, this is the best real estate in Ghost Town. Don't do some horse show there. So Bud comes up with, designs, and builds the Calico Mine Ride, which is a 7-story, 7.5-minute dark ride into a mining operation that is commensurate with anything that Walt Disney was doing at the time. But one man working with Walter Knott and contractors and build something just as good as what Disneyland was doing in the 1960s. It's pretty cool.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
starting off this conversation.
So we're here at the OSB, which is Operation School Bell on Wheels Universal Day of Giving, and it's basically where 3 different partnerships come together to bring this really spectacular day where kids get the opportunity to get clothing, to get new shoes, to get pampered and just treated with all this love and care, and then they get to go into the park at Universal Studios theme park and have a really great time with the chaperones, and then also see their favorite characters like the Minions and things like that while they're there.
It's my birthday today.
What'd you get today?
Clothes, uniforms, and a Minion.
Their adventure starts when they go inside the park. And we know that a lot of our kids have not had the opportunity, to go to theme parks or adventure parks in quite some time. And so they're very excited, and like I said, even the adults here are excited to give this experience to the kids.
Augmented reality has been around for a number of years, and like anything, there are shades of gray of technology or stories. We're not teaching you something foreign to your language, but we're then making something meaningful and impactful.
We're using augmented reality as a tool, not just as a gimmick. So when we're doing the Boxcar Children, for instance, you know, a lot of people have done augmented reality, which would have a little scene pop up on the cover. It's cool, it's no question, it gets your attention, but once you're done with that, it's like, okay, now what was I doing? What we do, we have them on the cover, of course, too, but we also have them on every single page that has an illustration in the book. And the content that we've created in this example supports helping you understand what you're reading.
I love what we do. I love that what we do is for education and for kids. I'm a huge fan of reading myself, and I just really appreciate the way that AR, augmented reality, gets just kids motivated into what they're learning, and it allows them to not only be connecting something visual, a storytelling, a character with what they're physically reading, but it engages different types of learning.
It's a tool that teachers can use to engage kids, and one of the reasons we like using characters is that you create an emotional attachment with the character. Unlike you would from just an audio thing or reading something, you have a character. You can be opening this book and say, let's see what Jessie has to say about this page. And there's your character, Jessie, pops up, that you know Jessie because you know she's been in the last 4 books you read.
Augmented reality is adding 3D assets to our real world. Using those 3D assets, we can entertain people, we can educate people, we can show people and weave together themes that you may not see.
Hi! We are so excited you are using the Boxcar Children Augmented Reality Workbook. I am Jessie, and in our workbook, you will find Violet. Hello! Henry.
Hi there.
Hey, where's?
Surprise! Looking for me? Hi, I'm Benny, and there are so many surprises on Surprise Island.
Oh, it has a lovely ring to it.
Welcome to Vegas. That's the magic.
My family and I were just here stopping for a second. We'll keep you company. Hello.
What we do that's very different, and what differentiates us, is we make something that's purposeful. We really see that between the kids loving it and the teachers that we're using their curriculum, we're not changing their curriculum. These are all required readers and textbooks that they already use. We're just making it relevant to their students. So I love that it's in education that we're doing it, and that we see from the kids that they light up, and that the teachers and the librarians and the school districts light up as well. That's a match.
They've done some studies with AR versus VR. VR is great if you're purely dealing with spatial things like you're showing a cell. But what they found with AR is the kids have a tendency to retain the auditory portion of it along with the spatial stuff. And I love the fact that when kids see those characters pop up on the pages of the books, they get so excited, they love it.
So how do you take what kids already use, okay, as something that's knowledgeable to them, and they have required reading, and to me this was an inspiration of, I loved certain books and I remembered them so well, and today kids learn how to like read to test and then they don't retain it. So how do you engage using technology of what they know and they love?
Oh, it has a lovely ring to it.
Welcome to Vegas. That's the magic.
My family and I were just here stopping for a second. We'll keep you company. Hello.
What we do that's very different, and what differentiates us, is we make something that's purposeful. We really see that between the kids loving it and the teachers that we're using their curriculum, we're not changing their curriculum. These are all required readers and textbooks that they already use. We're just making it relevant to their students. So I love that it's in education that we're doing it, and that we see from the kids that they light up, and that the teachers and the librarians and the school districts light up as well. That's a match.
Cheryl, thank you so much. I love what you are doing to help educate and teach reading.
Thank you so much. We started with Boxcar Children, and I'm offering it to LAUSD students, the first Boxcar Children with the app for free. We see how impactful it is. Teachers tell us if only they have a phone in the classroom, that it's something that they can plug into their smart boards, and then they can tell the students to use it at home. And then those students who are having trouble reading, it's a good support system to see that they can use it at home with their parents' phone as well. So we just don't make it so that there's no barrier to entry. So I'm very excited about how we're approaching elementary school. Next up is Sleepy Hollow and My Father's Dragon. But what we also addressed was that middle school was having a problem. And so we've done Animal Farm and Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet and Of Mice and Men, all required readers that are around the district. The one thing that we appreciate, and our whole educational pedagogy, is every single one of our AR experiences has purpose. So first might be plot, then is character, then it's context, then it's vocabulary questions, or it's comprehension questions. Well, in Animal Farm, it's a book that's historically, do kids understand that it has to do with history? So in this piece I'm about to show you, there's a character who lives on the farm. She's a rat. She's an, Orwellian aficionado, and she says to us, you know the word Photoshop. Well, Stalin, that's because it's historically based on that period of time. Oops, hang on a second. There it goes.
You see, history can be a malleable thing. One way to control the narrative is to control the information available to the public. An early example of photoshopping was in the 1930s. After executing his head of the secret police, Stalin had all images of the man altered or removed from the existing photographs. It was like he never existed.
So they give you the context of what's going on in the material. She will talk about photoshopping. She'll show two pictures, one that Stalin had with all the people in it, and one when he removed someone, how he had it photoshopped. So we try to give context for kids so that they truly understand from historical times to relevance to today. And before, when we were speaking, I used the word nostalgia.
Explain that, please.
Okay, I love this word. I can't say I made it up. My friend Jimmy Jam of Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis did.
Name dropping.
Okay, but,
love them.
Well, we worked on a project with him and Terry, and the reason why I love that is because it's really taking what you remember, the things that you know about history or what's familiar to you, just like books, you've heard about books, you've had to read books, but you're very familiar with this. We merge this, that we take the technology and we use the old and the new, and we bring it together, and it's nostalgia.
Nostalgia, I love that.
So I can show you Romeo and Juliet.
Please.
What's interesting is you never see Shakespeare speaking about his plays, really, because he's passed away, and we're supposed to be reading Shakespeare. So we have Shakespeare, and his wing woman is a robot, and she's the one who pulls him from history to the future to break it down to you why he wrote what he wrote. Give context and understanding. So it's very exciting to show those pieces as well, if I may.
Whoa, this is it. This is that famous balcony scene.
Famous, you proclaim?
All right, Mr. Big Head.
So we use humor, the things that are important to us. So now he's explaining why he uses night and day as light and intimacy.
Yes.
The cover of Night is significant to Romeo and Juliet. It symbolizes their freedom from the rules and opinions that typically keep them apart.
And you mentioned reading comprehension. So what you're doing is strengthening this reading comprehension that students struggle with.
Right. So it shows that there's opportunity, and a teacher gets a dashboard to be able to anonymize their students. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
To be able to anonymize their students, put code names for them, see how they're doing through the book. And what's amazing is kids feel like they're staying engaged in the material, not waiting for a test and then feeling lost. What I love is that teachers see that they're able to see how their student is doing within the material, so they're able to check in with them, and they're not feeling like they have to test them just at the end to see if they understood. But it also, the feedback we've been getting from teachers is the kinds of conversations it's prompting from students within the classroom. So now I see students are self-advocates. They are building more confidence in reading instead of, look, we're coming out of a pandemic and there was already low proficiency rates. Now we're looking at how to build confidence and comprehension and strong reading skills. So I love that this is something that students find it's fun. And students find that they don't feel shame or blame if they get it wrong. They're understanding why they might have answered that question the way they did. They're getting context, and they're getting another opportunity to get back into the material. And teachers can then track with them to say, I'm with you, I got you, and we're doing this together.
Well, as an educator, I want to thank you so much for giving us the tools to help strengthen just everything across the board when it comes to reading for our students, because that's all we want. And on behalf of LAUSD, I'm going to thank you for offering that first book to teachers.
I'm offering Boxcar Children, and I'm offering to middle school Animal Farm and Of Mice and Men in an ebook version. And so all I need to know is what teachers want it for their class, how many students, and we'll give them the ability to be able to use it.
Wow. Well, with that being said, I definitely want you to come back so we can do a follow-up, so we can watch the journey of all these wonderful students that will be reading these 2 books from you.
Thank you. Can I just say one last thing?
Absolutely. Okay. You can say one last thing.
If the teachers do use them, we also then will set as in-classroom Zoom to meet the makers. So they see how animators, illustrators, voiceover actors, musical composers, technological developers, how everybody, and motion capture artists, what it takes to make one of these, and then they can ask questions. So it's like an in-classroom field trip for the students who use it.
It's like you are redefining career day, and this is really what students love, everything with technology. So I love that you have that offer too. We will make sure that our audience can get in touch with you. Just don't come back to me when you start getting all these phone calls and emails.
I welcome them. We do this because we see we can make a difference. And that is the foundation of our company, and that is the foundation of watching a kid who thought they couldn't now have the opportunity and the privilege to say, yes, I can, and continue being curious learners. That's it.
That's important, and you are helping with those senses and learning, so thank you so much again.
Thank you.
You take care, and I can't wait to see what your company does next.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on Everybody with Angela Williamson. Viewers like you make this show possible. Join us on social media to continue this conversation. Good night and stay well.